This is Mom Squad Pod, your weekly update on tips, tricks, and all things parenting with Maureen Kyle.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me here on Mom Squad, the podcast and now streaming show where we talk all things parenting. And we are just getting ready to dust off those book bags and gently nudge those kids out the door once again. But maybe this year means a new school or a new building, maybe even trying a new sport. All of these changes can be intimidating, not just for kids, but for all of us parents too. So I got a chance to recently sit down with Willie Geist and his wife, Christina, who wrote a book for kids to prepare them for these transitions. Why do you think now is a crucial time to release a book like this?
I feel like we all need this right now. And ironically, I wrote this story in the fall of 2019, which was before COVID, before we had any idea what we would go through over the last 3 years. And there's just been so much separation, so much disruption. I don't think any of us know someone that didn't move or have a very close friend or family member who moved over the last couple of years. So we sort of all need this reminder that it just takes one thing in common with one person, one day at a time.
But there's so much more when it comes to little emotions and even big emotions. To help make things easier, I called on fellow mom and pediatric psychologist with Metro Health Hospital in Cleveland, Dr. Lisa Ramirez.
So I think what is a thing is that transitions are hard for all of us, and just like with anything, I think there's, some of us run really kind of ready for everything. I'm sure if you have multiple children, some are more apt to jump in feet first, whereas others may stick back a little bit. They want to know, how cold is the water before I jump off the diving board, or, who's going to be at the pool. So everybody's just a little bit different, but transitions in general mean going from one thing to another. And that inherently causes, a little bit of stress.
Yeah. Are there bigger transitions than others, or just, again, just depend on the child?
So going back to school, period, is a big transition, right? You go from days full of hopefully sunshine, maybe a little bit of rain, but really, maybe camps, but not a whole lot of structure, not a whole lot of schedules in general, a little bit more time to play outside, not a lot of homework, of course, different families may have different rest and recharge. So, and sorry, it's saying that my internet might be unstable. So just like wave if you can't hear me.
Okay, you blipped out for a second, but I can hear you again.
So yeah, so for any child, going back to school is going to be a transition, right? And a bigger one than, going from 4th of July to, the following week. But there are periods in a student's like academic point, the academic career points along childhood that are bigger than others, right? So one of them is going from maybe like a daycare or preschool to kindergarten. Yeah. Right? Kindergarten is a big change. Usually you're sitting down a little bit longer, you're doing a little bit more, transitioning between buildings. So different school districts might have a building where it's kindergartners through 8th grade all in one building. And that's going to be a different, than if you are looking at, a building that's maybe kindergarten and 1st grade in one building, and then, 2nd through 4th grade in another building, and then 5th to 8th grade, you can think each time a child is having to transition between buildings, between peers, being the oldest in the building besides being the youngest in the building, something like that. Those are going to be periods where that might be something that causes a little bit more stress or questions, curiosity, but something that's going to be a little bit harder for some kids than if it's just going back to the same school, riding the same bus, seeing the same students and teachers.
What about starting a new school? Like you've moved, your family's moved, now you're starting at a completely new school. How do you start to talk to a child about that? Because I feel like then there's a little bit of sadness, and missing old friends and missing the old environment, and then also the anxiety of starting something new and being the new kid.
Yeah, absolutely. So changing schools, moving is a big deal. So if you're moving cities, if you're moving states, moving countries, whatever it might be, that's going to be no matter what, different environment, maybe different weather, different, all kinds of things. So that's a big transition in and of itself. But sometimes students, are transitioning between different school systems or just moving around locally. So when a student is going to a new school, right, a whole new school system, a lot of what we encourage, and this is what I tell parents is that sometimes we have to pay attention to our own anxiety and our own worries and not project them onto our kids. So depending on how old your child is, right? A younger kid, family is still really important. So up until about fourth grade, yeah, mom and dad's opinion or grandma's opinion or siblings' opinion is really important. And that family's priority. Once you start to get into middle school and higher, those friendships, the peer groups, the acceptance, that's really priority. So a child moving in second grade is going to be very different than somebody who's moving maybe in seventh grade or in 11th grade. And so really trying to open a space for your child to talk about what's bothering them or what are they curious about? What are they stressed out about? I think a lot of times we try to anticipate because as parents, seeing our children uncomfortable is uncomfortable for us. And we have to, I will say this a lot. I think sometimes as parents, we have to acknowledge that it's okay to not feel great all the time. Right. And that's a skill in and of itself, is being able to move through changes and challenges. And instead of avoiding them all the time, it's actually building up that capacity to roll with the punches. And so being able to talk about what's bothering them is going to be really important. So you can answer questions. Maybe they want to go and without any students there, drive through just walk around the building, something like that, understand, maybe make a friend in a new city, opportunities to do things. But you'd be surprised that what you are thinking your child is stressed about may not actually be what they're worried about.
And do you feel like there's a certain age where kids are more open and then a certain age where they're more closed about, how they're feeling? Because then I feel like then you have to decode, signs of like, ooh, they are anxious, but I don't know why. And they're not telling me.
And Maureen, it's not only open, it's also like their ability to understand, like insight, So when you have a younger one, I think all the way back to something like toilet training, right? Some kids get really nervous about like using the bathroom for the first time, but they're all nervous for different reasons and they don't know how to tell you what they're scared of, And so when you start to get into, kindergarten, first grade, it may be trying to, and this is it can be a delicate balance or, a little bit of a balance of trying not to feed too much, right? You don't want to say, well, are you worried about this when they haven't quite thought about that? You don't want to, as they say, right, unlock new fears. But that being said, I think there's something to be said about modeling to you talking about what makes you nervous and having that language and that acceptance at dinner table, just in general, is really, really important for parents to model. So having access to what's bothering them developmentally, like earlier on, that's hard. I imagine your youngest is probably less able to vocalize exactly what's bothering them than maybe your oldest. But as they start to get into those middle and high school years, they tend to go internal a little bit. And I think, like I said, they appropriately so developmentally kind of turn away from family a little bit, and they're kind of trying to play, bounce things off friends a little bit more, or just not understanding all of those feelings. So typically we see about middle school, that dip of not always wanting to talk about things as much. That being said, if you have an open and accepting space and not push too much, you'd be surprised what just listening and being present and giving space for that can open up.
What about the situation where, they haven't really shown any anxiety, but then it gets to the moment, it's the school drop-off time, or you're standing on the sidelines in front of the new team and you're saying, okay, here you go, have fun. And then they hold back and cling in whatever way that's age appropriate, but you start to see that moment. Like, is there a way to encourage? Is there a right thing to say in that moment or a right thing to do?
Well, some of it will depend on your child, but what I like to say is that anxiety kind of lives in the back part of the brain, and it likes a lot of attention. It tends to take over, and being able to be present and kind of work through things is more kind of in the front part of the brain. So if early on you're teaching your children or you're having conversations about the fact that, like, all of us get nervous, right? When we have to step, I'm sure when you get on camera, and certain, if you're emceeing an event, it doesn't mean that you don't want to do it, but before you step on stage in front of a bunch of people, you might feel a little bit of nerves. So it's not that we're trying to avoid the nerves, it's how do we get through them? And that's really, I think, a really important conversation that we don't really have enough with our children, is that avoiding sometimes only makes it harder and worse. And so teaching how to stay present in the moment, how to do, thinking about what you're excited for, in those moments, thinking about, why you wanted to sign up in the first place. And this is sometimes I'll really ask parents, is your child excited about doing this activity? Or is this something that you have really signed your child up for? And sometimes those are the conversations we'll have my children almost like just so predictably will be excited about a certain camp or a certain activity. And then we get there and then it's the last thing they want to do. And so really reminding, but it's a very different conversation than if I have said, this is something that's important to me, because sometimes, it's harder to work through that because they didn't really have that internal motivation to begin with.
Right.
But often really helping to encourage that, we all get nervous, and these are ways that I deal with it. There's the physical grounding, there's the deep breaths, there's thinking about, like I said, the benefits of doing it, and just trying something. You won't know if you like it until you try it, and we will, in our family, we will say, if we sign up for an activity, we go through the activity, right? A 6-week camp or a 6-week league, something like that. We at least go through because there are team members and implications. But if you do the 6 weeks, you don't enjoy it, you don't have to do it again, having those conversations. But it is really, really common to get to the kind of that threshold and all of a sudden say, nope, I'm not doing it, diving board, whatever it is. It's all kind of the same feeling. And so the same way they get through that is helping them understand that, it's not really running away because you want to do it. So let's figure out a way to move through it.
What about, you mentioned sleep before we started this conversation. And I think that's, and I apologize, my just turned 4-year-old is beginning to play cars here on the ground.
I always have coworkers that are coming in. Yeah, my little coworkers, right?
Yes, the little helpers. She's, we can't wait for them to go back to school. But again, this is why we're talking, because there's going to be a big transition here for her soon. Going from the fun and the relaxation of summer, and it's our fault too. We're letting them stay up a little bit later, and maybe they're eating a little bit more sugar than usual, and they're unstructured. How important is it to get back to a little bit of that structure so that the transition isn't so harsh? It's not like falling off a cliff.
Yeah. It really, and I do think it's important to, your children. So there are some, I think about, there's like this family that I follow on Instagram, I think like the Bucket List family. I don't know if you've ever seen them, like they go all over the world, and their children can sleep on airplanes. And, and I remember she had this post where she said, we very intentionally, didn't do bedtimes and really focused a lot on that flexibility. Right. And so families like that, if there's a lot of flexibility and no need for it, then, really prioritizing that you can sleep anywhere. For most of us, we're not traveling around the world, and so for most of us, I think starting that transition ahead of time, and this is what will happen, is you want to squeeze out every moment of joy of the summer, every moment of joy of the summer. And so you go up until, let's say school starts on a Wednesday, you go up until like Monday night, and saying, doing the same bedtimes. But if your children respond pretty well to being able to change, if they're not sleep sensitive and they can, go to sleep at 10 o'clock and then 2 days later have that 8 o'clock bedtime and it works well, then by all means, and you're a parent that is okay with those schedule changes too. But I think a lot of parents really want to be able to have that gradual transition. So school doesn't feel like a punishment, right? It's not like school starts in 24 hours. And so now all of a sudden, all fun and joy goes away. So we start to think about slowly moving the bedtimes back, maybe half hour every few days, start to get ready, maybe moving the wake up times a little bit earlier every few days so that it starts to feel more gradual and not this sudden shift. And sleep is really important. Sleep impacts things like mood. So how readily, how joyful they are in getting dressed in the morning, eating the breakfast that you made for them, getting on the bus, it really does impact those types of things. It can impact immunity, which is important, as we're all going to be going back to school. It can impact learning, your ability to actually pay attention. If you're really tired because you haven't gotten at least 8 to 10 hours of sleep the night before, your brain's going to be kind of groggy, and so then, it's going to impact learning. So that's why we really, really promote thinking about what you want your child's sleep to look like during the school year, and about at least a week ahead of time, slowly starting to transition toward that. So again, it doesn't feel like everything everything has to change because of school all at once. That's a lot to put on a family.
Anything else that you can think of when it comes to like those big transitions or starting something new?
Well, I think too, preparedness, I think we undervalue how important that can be, especially for children who run a little bit more on kind of the, worrying side, or, I've heard a lot of people asking me lately, like, does my child have ADHD? And executive function is the ability to organize and plan. And when you're stressed out or when you haven't slept, executive function can take a hit. So the more we help our children organize and plan ahead of time, I think the more it helps them and the more it helps us, because I'm sure maybe you've never been in this position where, you're trying to get things done. All of a sudden you look, you need to be out the door in 5 minutes. Nobody has shoes on. People haven't finished. And now all of a sudden everybody's, kind of really irritated with each other. So, think about ahead of time. Are your children old enough to start to take on new responsibilities? Can somebody maybe, pack their own lunch? Or can somebody think about maybe making their own breakfast? Planning out outfits ahead of time can be really empowering for children to start to pick out their own clothes and get themselves dressed, and especially as you're moving toward a first day of school, backpacks packed in a predictable place and start to get that routine set. I think those things, we undervalue how helpful those can be. The planning, the organizing, and the predictability of, I know exactly where I need to go in the morning. My shoes are next to my backpack and I know what I'm eating for lunch, so the more we can try, that will help not only them feel empowered and have some successes, but also us as parents not feel like we're doing that mad, frustrated dash out the door.
Again, a very special thanks to Dr. Lisa Ramirez with Metro Health, and best of luck to any kid that is starting at a new school. Thanks for joining us on Mom Squad. We'll see you right back here next time.
Thanks for listening to Mom Squad Pod with Maureen Kyle from WKYC Studios. Subscribe now so you never miss an update. And find more on everything you heard here on WKYC.com and on the WKYC app.